Hello, thank you for joining me once again. Today I am continuing the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. Now this book is by Jon Peniel, and we are on chapter 2, part 2, at the part of The Fool Takes His First Steps, okay? So sit back, relax, hit that like button, subscribe, and for those who have subscribed, thank you. So let's get to it. The Fool Takes His First Steps. As wild as this may sound to some people, there really are forces of what you might call light and darkness, or good and evil, that work behind the scenes of this limited physical world we seem to live in. I didn't understand it at the time, other than having an intellectual grasp of the concept, which was far from being in touch with the realities of what that meant. Unbeknownst to me, they knew my every move. While I was being guided and somewhat protected by the forces of light, the other side was trying to throw me off track or destroy me. The outcome would ultimately depend on the choices I would make. My first test and struggle was to be with the major resistance I encountered from my family and friends. They didn't like the whole idea. They didn't want me to leave, and they didn't like the idea of me joining others of like mind. Generally, people would rather keep you within them in the hole they are in, rather than let you get out and offer a helping hand to help them out of the hole. So those of us who want to get out of the hole ourselves often not only don't get support, we get just the opposite. We get people and sometimes events doing everything they can to prevent it and keep us in the hole. Even though I hadn't lived at home since I was 16, my mother initially attempted to keep me from going by using her parental authority, refusing to let me go and threatening me with the police or putting me in an institution because I was underage. Then, when she realized that wouldn't work, she pulled one of the oldest mother tricks in the book. The famous, "I am sick. You can't leave me now" routine. Most people are capable of making themselves sick, psychosomatically or accidentally, but she was beyond that. She had been studying hypnosis, the power of the mind and such, for as long as I could remember. So she made herself sick. And while it was nothing serious at all, it was a somewhat painful temporary illness, an outbreak of sores that were more painful if she didn't stay in bed. So she was using that along with saying I was being selfish for leaving, as a guilt trip in an attempt to manipulate my life and free will choices. But she had already kicked me out of the house a year prior, because of her jealousy towards my girlfriend. So I wasn't living with her anyway, and there were dozens of other relatives looking after her. But even if it were more serious, I would have still had to leave. I found out why later. I was internally compelled to go regardless of any obstacles, let alone ones she was deliberately creating to manipulate me and keep me there. My internal drive and feelings were so strong, I felt like I would die if I didn't change my life, which was probably true. There were truly no choices. For those who might feel sorry for my mother, ask yourself if she was serving the light or just herself, and subsequently the dark. Then there were my so-called friends, who turned out to be fair weather friends, as most turn out to be one day when the chips are down. Most of them never liked my spiritual pursuits, and my new goal was the worst as far as they were concerned. But All but one tried to talk me out of it. They told me I was crazy to go, crazy to give up everything. And like my mother, they tried to make me feel guilty about abandoning them. They didn't want to get out of their hole they were in, and I did. And they wanted me to stay in mine. I didn't know it at the time, but my old friends, without knowing it, were also being unconscious pawns of the dark side. But considering my momentum and strong desire, they could not avert me from my goal either. The urge to go felt almost biological, like a salmon needing to swim upstream to return to its spawning ground. My friend John was the only person I knew who didn't try to talk me out of going. While he wasn't really supportive, he wasn't resistive either. He said, "You gotta do what you gotta do." We actually had a lot in common at the time. He and I were always able to have spiritual conversations and agreed on many things, unless they threatened his life choices. As we said our goodbyes and talked about life, he felt more and more like joining me. All of a sudden, he decided to go for it. But when he called his girlfriend and told her about his decision, she gave him some news that stopped him dead in his tracks. She said she was pregnant. And it wasn't the usual accidental story. She admitted she had deliberately stopped using birth control, which John had assumed she was still using, because she loved him so much, she wanted to have his baby. Whether it was true at the time or not, she deliberately got pregnant in a scheme to entrap him. She knew he was the kind of guy who would do the honorable thing and marry her. And he did. But what is the honorable thing when you have been deliberately entrapped so dishonorably? It's one thing to take responsibility for an unexpected but legitimate event, but quite another to play victim to such a treacherous scheme. A family that starts with that kind of severe and serious deception can only end badly, which it did. The dark side at work again, only against him this time. I advised him against it, but he insisted on doing the right thing anyway. I saw John again many years later. He and his wife had an ugly divorce after having 2 children. He was miserable and had become an alcoholic with numerous DUIs. John had irrevocably missed a significant fork in his path that I know now would have changed his life and those of others for the good. For me, it was back to the road alone and with a new sadness. Author's note. Everyone who starts on a spiritual path encounters multiple obstacles and attempts to derail them. It just happens in different ways for each individual. Keep this in mind if you're taking your first steps. It can happen in so many ways. A great new job offer, an old lover you'd never gotten over finally calls to say they want to get back together again. Your new car breaks down. You name it, it can happen. People may also twist things. You may be told you are being selfish by making your spiritual pursuit a priority, when the fact is you are actually starting a path towards becoming unselfish for the first time in your life. Anything that can possibly deter you from what you really want to do and the goals you've set for yourself may come up. Home at last. To make a very long story very short, I headed to Tibet using any means that would get me there, from hitchhiking to freights to camels, a story and of itself. When I got to the outskirts of Tibet, Guides associated with the order snuck me across the border and led me to the monastery. Communist China had already invaded, and troops had to be avoided at all cost. The monastery was in an isolated area of the Himalayas that was considered forbidden even to the Tibetans. Other than those of our order, no human had ever even stepped foot there until recently, when some daring and hardy explorers finally discovered the area. As we got closer to our destination, I was shocked to find that we were entering a warmer, wetter area. Most of the Himalayas are stark, frigid, and barren, and here I was in the midst of these great frozen giants surrounded by thriving, warm regions, plant life. And how beautiful it was. Finally, the day arrived when my quest would come to an end. All of a sudden, there it was, the place my heart and soul dreamed of. It was beautiful and strikingly unique. The pyramids, domes, and cubic structures created such unique artistic and otherworldly symmetry. I'd never seen anything like it. Seeing it from a distance, I was stunned, thrilled, scared, awe-inspired. Hundreds of feelings rushed through me like the waters of the powerful falls nearby. As I approached the monastery, I noticed many small buildings all around the outside of its walls. I found it interesting that the people inhabiting them and working around them were not all dressed in Tibetan fashion, but rather they wore the garb of various cultures. Most notably, they were all from very warm and welcoming me with their smiles. Immediately upon reaching the entrance to the monastery, I was greeted by a bright, friendly female monk. I discovered she was to be my liaison, and initially a kind of orientation tour guide. "Come in," she said. My name is something unintelligible to me. She saw the perplexed look in my eyes and grinned. That means Eastern Star in English. I must have looked how I felt, which was that one heck of a handle to call somebody by. She looked at my eyes kindly and said, "Just call me Anastasia." That's my old name. My parents were from Russia. I was in such a state of awe about finally finding what I'd hoped for all my life that I was speechless. So while I thought to answer her, I remained silent. "As you may know, we have been expecting you," she said. "I'll show you around and initially answer any questions you might have." Questions, I thought to myself. I have more questions than I can probably even ask in my lifetime. She took me by the hand and began to show me the grounds. "Thank you." I finally managed to find part of my tongue. Like she said, they were expecting me. And it was obvious from the guides and others who met me along the way that they also knew the timing and path of my journey. I didn't understand exactly how they knew it all, but I figured I'd find out later. For now, though, I was more interested in the reactions I was getting or not getting from the other monks on the grounds. Some were obviously working, some doing yoga-like techniques, and others appeared to be just sitting and hanging out. Many of them stopped and stared, while others seemed to be ignoring me. It just seemed sort of odd to me at the time, so I asked her about it and about the people who were living just outside the monastery. You'll find out later about the people who live near the monastery. But to answer your questions about the monks here in the monastery, it's just the timing of your arrival. Author's note. I later found out there was more to it than that. We were all very busy, and those who see you here, pointing to the groups who were to be ignoring me, are doing... Okay, hold on. I'm back. You'll find out later about the people who live near the monastery. But to answer your questions about the monks here in the monastery, it's just the timing of your arrival. Author's note. I later found out there was more to it than that. We were all very busy, and those you see here, pointing to the group who seem to be ignoring me, are doing a special long meditation exercises that require deep concentration, and they would have to start over again if they stopped or even lost their concentration. She smiled and said, although I noticed some of them lost their concentration anyway. Then I caused more of a stir than I thought, I said. You'd be surprised. You'll get a chance to meet everyone later. But why don't I just show you the grounds for now? Sure, on with the tour. But I've got to tell you, I've come farther to get here than Disneyland, so I hope it's worth it. Disneyland? She spoke perfect English with an American accent, so I'd assume she was familiar with Disneyland. Well, I'll tell you about it later. You probably won't believe me anyway. Oh, yes, I will, she said with a cute, innocent enthusiasm. I could tell I could have some big fun pulling her leg. Anastasia, you speak English perfectly. Those of us who were raised here are multilingual, but even the monks who weren't raised here learn at least English or Spanish. In addition to their native language, if it is something other than that, monks have come here from all over the world. Some are also fluent in many of various languages spoken in most parts of the world, even ancient languages. You can learn any language here that you wish. I'm having a hard enough time with English at the moment. How many languages do you speak? Only 7 modern languages. Oh, only 7. That's too bad, I said jokingly. She didn't get my sarcasm, and I just nodded in agreement. As Anastasia was taking me to her first stop on my tour, I began asking many questions about the architect. Be patient. You can't learn everything in one day anyway. You'll find out everything you want to know later. When? I don't know. Tomorrow? Next year? A decade? Whenever you do, you will have. Her unrevealing, complex, perplexing answer just reminded me a bit of a short time I'd spent earlier at a Zen monastery. Those Zen monks certainly loved their paradoxical questions and answers. I didn't know it at the time, but I would discover far more paradoxes here and eventually come to understand them. Finally, the radiant young woman showed me to a room where a monk was speaking to a group of other monks. There are many adepts who can help you grow here. Of course, I know everyone can teach you something. Even life itself is a teacher. She pointed at the man who was speaking to the others. Here is my special, personal, true teacher, and has also been like a father to me, especially since my parents are no longer with us on this plane. He helps me change and grow. How does he help you change? He helps me see and understand myself clearly, and thus I can change things about myself that I wouldn't ordinarily even see. How does he do that? And what does true teacher mean? You love asking more than one question at a time, don't you? There's just so much I want to learn. I understand. I was just teasing you. I should probably answer your second question first. That's because, second question first, the adept or initiate monks like him are also what we call true teachers. That's because they have transcended their own selfishness and self-centeredness and achieve what we call universal consciousness. Many different spiritual traditions have their own name for achieving that. Some call it achieving Satori, some nirvana, some illumination, and some, like us, refer to it as enlightenment or initiation. But whatever you call it, it is a transformation that creates a total change in their viewpoints and way of life. That brings us to your first question. Because of their broad universal consciousness perspective, their unselfish love and lack of selflessness and lack of selfishness, they thus see everything, including people, very objectively, purely, and clearly. So they see things about yourself that you don't see yourself, or even things you block or hide inside yourself, and bring them up to you. Thus, you can use them as a sort of tool to see yourself clearly. See things you want to change, then change if you want to. Only the adept monks are what you call true teachers then? Yes. There are basically three kinds of monks in our order. Novices and elders are still essentially students. The adept or initiate monks are more like personal growth facilitators or therapists. Why do you use the term true teacher instead of just master or teacher or guru or something like that? Because it's accurate. It also avoids labels that are sometimes associated with ego or lack of humility, and the same time separates them from just an ordinary teacher. Many people and things can teach you, but a true teacher is a specific type of teacher. They're true in the sense of accuracy or lack of distortion. Like a true arrow, in that sense, it's just like a true mirror. It's best for seeing your body or face rather than an untrue mirror with imperfections that would distort your reflection. Like I said, their teaching or telling you about yourself is pure and true because of the objectivity they have achieved from not being contaminated by or subjected to their own selfishness anymore. So rather than thinking about themselves all the time, as most people do, they aren't self-centered or defensive. Because of their unselfish consciousness, they don't have anything to personally gain or lose in dealing with you, or to get in the way of their objectivity about you. So they just think and care about you, your best interest, and the best interest of all others. And they can tell you what you see from that great, higher, broader, more loving perspective if you ask for their help or opinion. The room where the true teacher monk was given a talk was lit only by a candlelight, so I couldn't see his face very well. But when everybody went outside to do an energy exercise, I saw it clearly. It was the man I saw on TV. I didn't know it at the time, but he would soon be the most important person in my life. While some part of me rejoiced, some part of me cringed. I didn't know why at the time. I just knew He was somehow frightening to me, like staring death in the face. Later, I would realize it was because of his ability to confront me and show me myself, which my selfish, self-centered ego strongly wanted to avoid. Because of that, I would do everything I could to avoid him for a while. But there was an even stronger draw I had towards something about this man that would eventually lead me to ask him to be my special mentor also, my personal teacher. I didn't know his name yet, but soon I heard one of the other monks there call him Zain. My head was reeling. I had to remind myself that this wasn't a dream. It was another world, one that I thought only existed in my imagination just one long year ago. Outside in a courtyard, Zain and over 100 people formed a circle holding hands with arms stretched out between them. They were about to do an energy technique called the star exercise. I had read about this years ago in a very old book I read by an author whose last name was Ledbetter, or something similar. The book was about what he called the Great White Brotherhood in Tibet, and it described them doing something called the star exercise during a festival called Wesak. But many of the particulars were never mentioned in the book, and the author's stories also indicated that the people were as inaccessible as any myth. So while the book was fascinated and attracted me in many ways, and his description of the people sounded like home, it left me with nothing I could further pursue. Now I found myself living it, the real thing. Anastasia ushered me into position in this great human chain that formed the circle and gave me quick instructions, and then it began. I closed my eyes as a feeling of lightheadedness came over me. My head and body were buzzing with energy. I thought I was perhaps starting to black out, yet all I saw was fluctuating white light. It seemed as if I was experiencing a million thoughts and pictures all in a moment's time. As I opened my eyes, I saw energy vibrating in all things and all the people there. Everything was flashing with white light superimposed over it. Apparently, I wasn't the only one experiencing some dramatic effects from the star exercise. A novice monk had come to join in the exercise a little late and stood alone outside the circle. He collapsed and lay there as if lifeless. I heard Zain muttering some kind of admonishment about it being dangerous to stand outside the circle. Then he said loudly, "One has left the body. He has become lost. I must retrieve him." And in a few moments, the body of the collapsed novice twitched, and he returned to consciousness. Afterwards, Zain sat in the side courtyard garden for a sort of question-and-answer session. I was still vibrating with energy and seeing it everywhere. I wanted to tell him about my experience, but I was simultaneously afraid to say anything to him or bring attention to myself. But I did, and that is a story we'll save for a chapter later in the book. Anastasia then started walking me over to the monastery's residential area. I didn't know what to expect. I had studied other monasteries and had even visited and spent time in some. In monasteries that teach or utilize constant asceticism as a primary spiritual growth tool. The monks' quarters are often called monks' cells because that's pretty much what they are. Tiny, jail-like cells like what you might find in a prison. Of course, to the monks who chose that kind of path, their cells were voluntarily part of their training, not a means of imprisonment or punishment by a government. But in any case, I didn't even like the idea of dormitories, let alone cells. I would later learn to drop such personal preferences in favor of adapting and flowing, but I wasn't there yet. On our way over, I asked Anastasia about the living situations with nervous, introverted concern. So, what do you have here? What do you have here? Monk cells or dormitories? Except for temporary aspects of a monk's training, learning self-discipline or self-transition training, which I was about to come face to face with, our way of life is quite moderate and even luxurious by many standards, especially by other monastic standards, at least as a general rule. That's nice to hear, but you didn't exactly answer my question. I especially don't like dormitories. Well, they are and they aren't. You'll see. When we finally arrived at the monks' residential area, I was quite relieved by what I saw, although it was natural, odd, like most everything else around here. These are the private sleeping, living, and meditation areas, she said. I expressed my relief to Anastasia. I have to admit, this is far nicer than what I was expecting. Yet, it's rather bizarre. I was surprised to find an odd honeycomb of private rooms. And while the quarters Anastasia was showing me were far smaller than the monks' quarters of many other orders, oddly enough, they were very cozy and comfortable. In fact, there was no comparison to the dark, dank, cold harshness of the traditional monk cells. They were beautifully decorated, had curtains, pillows, and mats, sheets and quilts, little combinations, shelf/altar/storage areas, incense burners, candles, even lights, but they were tiny. They were pretty tiny rooms, Anastasia. That's true, but they're tall enough to sit up, read, and meditate in, and long and wide enough to lay down in. They serve as both our personal quarters and places for our solitary meditations. Even for someone my size. Sure, and actually, they are quite comfortable and cozy. In fact, we call them wombs instead of rooms because they're so cozy. They're kind of like a womb. Cute. The wombs were an ingenious architectural design and concept. They were much like honeycombs. Their efficient design would allow many of them to fit into what would be a normal-sized bedroom for someone in the U.S., but more importantly, they were moderately designed. So if you had a mate or family, wombs could be instantly connected and expanded as needed. And as it turned out, they were extremely cozy and comfortable. And I never found them lacking as either living quarters or meditation chambers. But I was in for another surprise. So, which one of these is mine? I asked. Novices don't get one right away. I later found out that I was just to put novices through tests and changes that created personal growth. Then where do I sleep? I said with a bit of surprise and stress. See that pile of mats over there? When you are through for the day, just go get one and find any place you can and lay it down. My stress just jumped up a notch, but I immediately got a grip on myself. What the heck? After what I'd lived through, even that would be a luxury. What I didn't know at the time is there was a deliberate shortage of mats, and it was first come, first serve. I made that surprise discovery that night when I couldn't find any more mats. Okay, now I was an unhappy camper. But in time, I learned it was all part of a series of tests and growth techniques that everyone like myself went through on this path. And the rewards were far greater than the sacrifices. Note, I eventually got a 5-unit womb with a view. After the wombs, she brought me to the library. I was astonished. It was vast, the largest building I had yet seen. This is our library. Where do I get a card? I asked. She looked at me quizzically. I don't think we have any cards, but we have many, many other things to read. She wasn't kidding. And she also wasn't kidding about many other things to read. Texts, scrolls, and tablets of every description were in here. The important literature, philosophy, and religious teachings from cultures all over the world were at my fingertips, including various ancient and modern translations in most languages. There were even texts about cultures that had no written languages. I felt I could spend the rest of my life just in here. No, I could spend lifetimes. Where did all this come from? It was collected over time. We also have original texts from most religious teachings, including the biblical, in their original handwriting. I was in heaven. She had to drag me out of there to continue our tour. It was collected over time. We also have original texts. Anesthesia eventually took me to a relatively small meditation room compared to the hall I had seen earlier. This is where elder monks teach classes for novice monks. Elder monks were ones who had learned and grown a great deal, but still had not achieved total unselfishness or total enlightenment. But even so, they had a lot to offer and were far nicer people than I had ever met. They were as good as saints from my perspectives and consciousness at the time. What kind of courses do they give? Elders teach courses in meditation techniques, basic spiritual principles and their applications, history, and conduct some limited personal growth sessions. I would be spending most of my time learning and getting counseling from elder monks during my first few months at the monastery. The entrance to this meditation room had a very short door, and I had to bend over in order to get in. Why is the door so short? I had asked. It obviously had been custom built, and the room itself was as big as a large living room. By building the door so it physically requires those who enter the room to bow, it is meant to symbolically remind both elders and novices to be humble and have respect and compassion for all. A class was about to begin, so she advised me to stay there and begin my first course. Am I a monk now? I asked. That's up to you. This is a monastery, and only monks stay here. I assume that is why you came. I hope I didn't overstep my bounds with my assumption. No, I do wish to stay, learn, and grow. I guess I'm just accustomed to people not being so sensitive and having to sign up for everything and getting your own car lubed. Well, I don't know about you getting lubed, but you will need to ask the head monk if you can stay. However, we've already discussed you, and he's also assumed you would be asking to stay, considering. She briefly paused mid-sentence, as if she almost slipped up and told me something she wasn't supposed to. But she immediately spoke on, and has already indicated your acceptance. So what kind of monk am I then? A student, novice, elder, frat brother, or what? I joked. Novice? You need a teacher to be a student. And you need to be a student to be a teacher. I wasn't quite sure what she meant by that. Was she going zen on me again? Well, I see you later, I said. Of course, dear. We live together now. I didn't know exactly what she meant by that either, but I figured it wasn't the same thing it meant in the outside world. When will I see you again? And please don't say maybe tomorrow, maybe next year. She touched my shoulder lovingly and said, I'll be by as soon as the class is over. Okay? Okay. There were about a half a dozen other English-speaking novices there in the room, new and relatively new students of various stages. And I got my first taste of what would be many courses. Even though these courses were not given by the teachers who were enlightened masters, I was totally impressed by the wisdom, kindness, and compassion of the elder monks who conducted them. I learned all kinds of things in various courses, including ancient teachings and religions of the world, meditation and energy techniques, yoga, etc. But sometimes the elders just spoke spontaneously about things other than what the course was about. And when they did that, I was floored by what I thought were their psychic abilities. It was as if they were reading my mind, picking up on my every thought, answering my unasked questions, and finding my hidden secrets, and then discussing them all out in the open to free me of my inner burdens. It was kind of like getting indirect therapy. It seemed like every word was just for me. But I couldn't understand how this could be happening just for me, when there were other novices in the room at the time. I wondered if they were having the same experiences. I later found out that it was not a psychic thing that was happening, at least as we know it. It's not simple to explain. It's covered in later chapters, though. But the elders who were giving these courses were doing a meditation technique of sort, get out of their own way, so to speak, in order to really be in touch with us and to be conduits for what we needed to hear. They didn't really even consciously know themselves what we were thinking or why they were saying what they were saying, but the effects was the same. By the time the session was over, I was exhausted. I was about to drop. Anastasia met me as I came out the door, but I was too tired, even for her. So I bid her good night, but instead of reciprocating, she was silent. When she finally left, instead of saying good night, she said, "Get a good rest." Later, I found out the reason she didn't say goodnight wasn't because Get a good rest was the local customary phrase, but because good night was just a subconscious habit phrase of mine that had thus become only a meaningless parroted phrase rather than a meaningful statement of caring. In other words, saying good night probably originally came about from wishing someone to have a good night and actually consciously meaning what you were saying. Now, however, it had just degenerated into preconditioned, subconsciously pre-programmed appropriate phrase to say when someone went to bed. The same went for other common phrases like good morning and goodbye, God bless you, and many more. In order to learn all about my own consciousness and subconsciousness, I needed to stop and think about the things and take up opportunities like not saying simple goodnight to help break the patterns and increase my awareness. I had a lot to learn about the mind still. I looked for a mat and couldn't find one. I was way too tired to panic or even ask anyone about it. So I found the nearest corner that was out of the way and just hit the floor. I was immediately out like a light. The next morning, I was awakened by Anastasia with a cheery smile and a cup of tea. I was still wiped out and groggily sat up. It seemed like I had just closed my eyes and lied down. Drink this, she said. What is it? It's tea, silly. It will make you feel better. I sipped some. It was terrible. What kind of tea is this? It's called mate. It's from Brazil and difficult to get. So don't turn your nose up to it so quickly. It tastes like old socks. It grows on you. So can the things on old socks. But it doesn't mean I want to drink them. She laughed. You'll appreciate it soon. It's the only drink we have right now that has caffeine in it. And it also seems to help adjust to the altitude. You allow caffeine here? One of her eyebrows raised in surprise. It isn't a rigid order. In fact, moderation in all things is a cornerstone of the order. Ah, caffeine. It tastes a little better now that I know that. I'm just exhausted, and I didn't sleep very well. I couldn't find a mat. Oh, you poor thing, she said, truly sympathetically. I didn't want to appear whiny or a wimp, so I responded with the proper machoism. It's not the lack of the mat that was the problem. I understand, she said, patting me on the knee. I still remember a trip I took with my parents up here to India when I was a little girl. You're going to need a few days to recover at least. That's why I let you sleep so long and brought you some tea. Sleep so long? It looks like the sun just came up. Yes, that's what I mean. We usually rise before the sun. Is that one of the rules here? Most of us do that, but not all. Are there any basic rules here? Yes. Be kind. Don't hurt anyone. That's it? Surely there must be more. Well, yes, of course. You have a lot to learn. So what are the other rules? Well, you are supposed to get me tea every morning, she joked. Seriously? No, only if you want to. I don't mind. I'd be happy. I was just teasing. I already get tea for myself and someone else every morning, but thanks for the offer. You'll eventually get into the swing of things and get a schedule, unless you have something to do otherwise. We get up with the rising energies of the earth. Before the sun, we do a few private morning meditation techniques and yoga, then have morning meeting and group meditation. One of the adept monks speaks afterwards. All monks have some kind of work to do around the monastery. You'll have various meditations to learn and masters that you'll be practicing at different times of the day. You'll probably spend a little time every day reading the ancient teachings in the library, but your routine might be different. I don't know. It mainly depends on what your personal teacher thinks you need. Everyone is different, so they'll all need different things in order to learn and change. So your routine may be very different from mine. I hope not. She smiled again. So what is my routine right now? I don't know. What do you mean? I thought you were going to get me in the groove of things here. Only to an extent. The rest, like I said, will be up to your personal teacher. Okay, so who's my teacher? I don't know. You don't know? She nodded affirmingly. This was getting a little ridiculous. It was starting to remind me of trying to get my straight answer out of a Zen master I had back home. So I tried to come at it from a different angle. Before I could, she spoke again. Only you can decide who your personal teacher will be. I asked them to be your teacher. And ask them to be your teacher if you want to. Will you be my teacher? She laughed and said, I'm hardly qualified to be your teacher, but thank you anyway. I am honored. And that was real sweet of you to ask. I already told you who my personal teacher is, and I can tell you what my basic schedule is. Would that help? She smiled. Anything would be welcomed, Anastasia. Are you an nun, elder? A nun? Well, we are all the same here, whether male or female. You could call us all monks or all nuns or all whatever. They're just words. Titles, ranks for a position don't matter. It doesn't really matter what you call anyone. It's what you are that counts. Don't you think? Sometimes the labels help keeps things more organized in our silly little brains, but sometimes it can create false or unfair divisions and false worship where none is warranted. I guess I might be called a nun in certain orders, except I'm not fully celibate, which sometimes being a nun requires. So generally, we all consider ourselves just monks or students or teachers, depending on our capabilities and consciousness. Wait, back up a second. Fully celibate. It seems like you either are or you aren't. I'll explain some other time. Anyway, some of us do call the adept female monks mothers, however, but it's because they kind of become like universal mothers when they are enlightened. It's more of a term of endearment, than a title. Like I said, titles are really unimportant. You could call them sisters or chum, for all they care. In the next few weeks, I developed quite a crush on Anastasia. I had never had a woman feel so lovingly towards me, and because of what I was accustomed to, as far as male/female relationships go, I thought that her affection meant that she liked me in a romantic sense also. I wasn't used to being loved so dearly without it meaning that she wanted to be with me. I didn't understand pure, real love yet, and I didn't have the consciousness to respond to her without selfish possessiveness. So it came up as quite a shock and disappointment to me when I found out that she was not interested in me in that way. It turned out that she actually already had a mate and that she had a very good and close relationship with. She was just a loving, caring person. Just a loving, caring person. I said it as if it were common. Excuse me. Women who are truly spiritual, kind, and caring typically have quite a problem with men thinking about them the way I did with Anastasia. Actually, lusting after them would be a more accurate way to put it. Not just in a sexual sense, although that's certainly involved, but in wanting their attention and affections way. So, you might want to learn from my mistake and take some helpful advice if you ever meet such a special, truly spiritual woman. Don't make the same mistake. Just because a woman is warm, kind, and caring towards you doesn't mean she wants to be your possession or have romance or sex with you. This goes for all women, but it is especially true for women of advanced spiritual development. Just take the love you get. It's wonderful to even ever receive such love. And don't try to possess it for yourself alone or make that woman the center of your life. That's the role only God can fulfill. Bringing my story up to date in summary. As the days went by, I slowly adjusted to my new surroundings and began to absorb what I could. Years later, I finally graduated. Now, as was prophesied within our order centuries ago, this book was written to present the essential ancient teachings to the public in an unadulterated, clear, easily understandable fashion. Along with this, I will include some of my personal experiences, both ones that I had while I was a young novice student on my road to change, and a few of those that I had later in life, after I became an initiate. That way you can get a glimpse of things from both sides, the teachers and the students. Okay, that was Chapter 2, Part 2 of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. Pick this book up for yourself. Read it, reread it, but come back and listen to me read it or read it along with me, okay? So, subscribe, hit that like button, and until the next time, have the most benevolent day ever.